All right. So welcome to GroupBy, your last session for the Americas today. We're going to talk about dbaTools and do a deep dive. So thanks to GroupBy and all the things that they do for us as speakers and also for the community of giving us content that will be available to us after. So thank you for that. Remember, there is a code of conduct. We want to make sure that everybody feels confident in being safe and being with us today. This is me. Nice. And I am DBA Duck everywhere. So if you want to get a hold of me, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever, I am DBA Duck. My website's DBA Duck. I have a consultancy called Ben Miller and Associates, soon to be DBA Duck Consulting. So that'll be kind of fun. This is the Yay Me slide. We won't belabor much with slides. You'll see how much I love slides. But I've been doing this for a long time, doing PowerShell for DBAs for a very long time. And I absolutely love to do these things. The only thing I'd call attention to is my email address. You're welcome to email me anytime, day or night. I'm usually pretty good at email. So if you want to email, I'm pretty good to email back, probably every 24 hours. So it doesn't matter if it's today or 2 years from now. You're welcome to do so. Our media sponsors, Idera, thank you very much for the sponsorship here. We always appreciate sponsors getting involved in our world. Now, this is the agenda. It looks kind of small. We're going to spend most of the time in demo, so don't get alarmed that the agenda is pretty slight. But I wanted to make sure I introduced at least something to do with what we're going to do today. So the environment is first, PowerShell Profile. You cannot be without a PowerShell Profile. There's many things, and we'll talk through some of them. I'll show you my profile, but I want to give you an idea of what you can do with dbaTools and why it matters. And then there's some syntax that you'll see. I want to make sure I introduce that to you, and then we're just going to go into demo. So first, Windows PowerShell. Hopefully everybody is on a workstation that supports PowerShell 5.1. dbaTools does not require 5.1. It is on 3.0 right now, but it will grow into 4 and 5 eventually, I'm sure. But for now, it does run on 4.0 and 5.1, and also runs in PowerShell Core. And I have 7.2, but 3 is out, and it works actually in 7.3 as well. Most of the commands are available in 7, not just a few. If you tried to do the SQL Server module, which is in my slide here, because it does have some value in the provider, which is not the topic of this session, but SQL Server actually does not, it has not been ported all the way to 7.0 core. So just know that when you use dbaTools, you do have a choice. When you run it on a core machine, such as Linux or Mac, it does support most of the commands actually port over, and you can use them. So the environment's going to be important to get your PowerShell groove on in that version. The next pieces are just modules I really like. This is my core environment. I have dbaTools, I have SQL Server, and I have Import Excel, really cool module that lets you stuff things in and out of Excel without having Excel on the box, which is fantastic. So take advantage of that. And then pending reboot is also another one of my favorites when you do patching, and I do patching a lot for SQL servers and clusters as well. You cannot install SQL Server CUs unless there's no pending reboot. And sometimes Windows makes you reboot twice after installing updates. So I always use pending reboot, which has one command called test-pending reboot, and it returns true or false. And that helps me to know whether that is. So these are my core modules. There's several others you could use, PoshRS Job and all these others, but these are my core ones that I use all the time. And then obviously execution policy, remote signed, you want to do that. The dbaTools module is signed, so you're protected. Even if you did all signed, you could run dbaTools under that because it is signed, so you don't have to worry about that. The second, PowerShell Profile. Transcripting is a must-have when you start doing dbaTools, and not just running dbaTools, but there are many times when you're going to try to figure out commands, and I'll show you what I mean when we go into demo. It's going to be super obvious that discovering is probably the first thing you need to be willing to do to deep dive into dbaTools. There are over 650 commands inside dbaTools, and I wish I could show them all to you. I wish DBA Tools Deep Dive meant that I was going to give it all to you. I wish, but we're going to go through some key ones and some fun ones just to show you what depth is beyond backup and restore. Backup and restore are cool. You could do I do a whole session on backup and restore alone because there's so many options there, but we're going to talk about other functions that are in there. So the transcript really is basically a court reporter sitting on your computer to allow you to see what was done. I use transcripts a lot when I discover. I also use transcripts when I'm running headless. So if I have a job and I run an automation or I run something that needs to run on a regular basis and I want to see what took place, an error was thrown, something happened, I run a transcript first, and then I run the job inside the start transcript and do the stuff and then get out and stop transcript. That way, when I come back in the morning, I can actually look at that text file and see what took place. And if I write my functions correctly, which again, dbaTools does write them very well and allows verbose and allows other output that goes to the screen, it's very handy to capture that in a transcript. I'll show you how I use mine. Functions, that's your functions. Other people call them commandlets. Commandlets can be meaning that they're compiled or part of PowerShell themselves, but you could call the commands inside dbaTools commandlets as well because they are commands. They are referenced as functions, and that's fine. And the other thing in PowerShell Profile is having preset variables. So you know your environment better than anybody else. And you might have 5 servers, you might have 10, you might have your favorite databases that you always mess with or whatever, or need dbaTools to operate against. So you can have variables like $prod equals, and then an array of servers that equal your prod servers, and then a $dev and equal your dev servers. And it would give you the ability to have these in your profile to allow you to use them in your commands to preset things so that you don't always have to type all of the parameters and all of the variable values. So that's what I use my PowerShell profile for. You really want to keep your profile decently lean. On startup, it loads this thing. So just keep it lean. Sometimes I don't even import the modules if I don't want to. I might want to just get to a trend or to a window really fast. The thing that hasn't improved immensely is the load time for dbaTools. It can take a little bit of time because there's so many commands. They're working on trying to get things to run or load faster. So whenever you import module dbaTools, it could run 3 seconds. That's pretty long if you're expecting a prompt right now. So just be aware that sometimes you can get that where it's a little latent on the loading. But that's why I don't load all my modules in the profile. I used to, but now I can dot source my command that has the import modules in it, and that way I get them. And the last thing before we go to demo is the syntax you're going to see. So get command, that's going to be your friend. I do get command dash module to see what commands are in the module. And we'll do that here in demo as well. Pipelines, the little pipe symbol, though pipelines are going to be huge. Some commands in dbaTools require you to use pipelines. And I'll make sure you understand how that works and how you find out. Then get help with a dash show window. That's a command a lot of people don't know about, but it's really super cool. Get member and get type. So lean on the numbers of commands you have to worry about. But the big things is that these will help you find your way through what matters in dbaTools, because dbaTools has a lot to offer. And if you understand the ecosystem of dbaTools, which is why this presentation exists, then you will get so much more out of using dbaTools than to be afraid of how do I do this or what does this even mean? So let's go into demo now. We don't want to do slides anymore.
Hey, as you're switching over to demo, there were a couple of questions that popped in, and I figured this is a good enough time. So what do you do if you cannot get dbaTools to load if the environment is secure?
What if well, secure by meaning that it doesn't have access to the internet? I'm assuming that's
certain.
what that means. So the beautiful thing is that you can actually go to a machine that has internet access, and you can say install -module dbaTools. And actually, you can install it there, or you can do save -module and the modules dbaTools, and you can tell it where to put it. And you can even tell it versions, but save module will let you put it to a path. And that once it's in a path, I'll show you the path of where you install it. But the path here, I installed it on my machine. It's in Documents, Windows PowerShell modules. Oh, nope, I guess I did put it in the global one. If you don't put the scope as user, then it will put it in the Program Files, Windows PowerShell modules, and dbaTools. You can actually take this dbaTools folder and X copy it. You can just copy it across the network to the machine that needs it, and it will load. As long as you put it in these locations, Program Files, Windows PowerShell modules, or you could do it into, the core is a little different. It actually puts it in Program Files and then PowerShell. But I don't have it on here, so I won't show you that. But either that or Documents, your Documents folder for your user, Windows PowerShell modules, and then paste dbaTools. So it is X copyable. Once it's pulled down from the PowerShell gallery, you have all bets that you can copy and paste those folders to another place, as long as PowerShell knows where they are. And the way you know where they are is if you were to go PS module environment, PS module path. And then we will split it by a semicolon. So this PS module path variable has the locations of where it looks for modules. And that's the only place it looks for modules, by the way. So it does look in your users first. So that's my personal or scope to current user. This is my global one, which is Program Files, Windows PowerShell. There will be a different environment variable for PowerShell core, but this is where I look. PS in envp PS module path -split semicolon, and it will tell you the folders that you can put them in. And as long as you copy the dbaTools folder in there, that's where it will look for your versions of PowerShell. So in a secure environment, no problem. Still be able to get that to your place.
Outstanding. Thank you, Ben. And the other half of the other question was, the person was asking for a request if you're going to do an example of using profiles. Apparently, this person's never seen it before. And of course, do you happen to have a GitHub with all this code out there?
I do have a GitHub, yes. And it is out on my GitHub at dbaDuck and in presentations. So there's a presentations folder. If you go out to GitHub /dbaDuck, you will see that I have a presentations folder, and there will be a GroupBy, and I will put this, I'll put this one up there once I get done. I don't normally put it up there until after, because I run a transcript. So everything in my demos are transcripted. So just to make sure that you see what I see, whenever we decide to dovetail into something that maybe not here, or I type in my demo, heaven forbid we type in our demos, that's all captured in the transcript. And then I put the transcript up into the GitHub repository. So if you see here, there's a zip file that will be in that folder. And it will have all of the demos, and it will have, I mean, the slides aren't really valuable, but it does have my email address in it. So that's handy, but it will have the demos and the transcript in it. So that's where you get them. Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. So this is a copy of my profile that I use most often. I've changed it and modified it for different environments, but this is the one we're going to go through really quick, because really we're here to see dbaTools, not profile. But since somebody asked, I'm going to quickly show you what a profile looks like. It is just a PS1 file. And honestly, it is in the $profile variable, and it tells me where that profile is. And all I have to do is create that file and put the PS1 and with that name, and I can put all this code in it, and it will load when I launch my window here. So that's what a profile does. I want to tell you this little tip. We are not yet on the back end of TLS. So PowerShell Gallery forces you to use TLS 1.2. They do not accept anything lower anymore. No TLS 1.1, 1.0, no SSL 3. It has to be TLS 1.2 and above. Windows 2022, Server 2022 has TLS 1.3, and it's still compatible because it can talk down, but it has to be 1.2 and above. If you're not luxurious enough to have the latest and installed latest, upgrades don't always carry this forward. IT people have not protocol, then you will have an issue. And when you type in install dash module, it does use the PowerShell Gallery. So beware that if you get back some weird gobbledygook on the install module saying I can't find the PS Gallery, I put this at the top of my profile so that when it loads, I automatically have set that session to use TLS 1.2. Now I don't have the problem of having the IT people set it on my machine or whatever. And then from the start of my profile, I create a date object that tells me down to the seconds. So this is just part of my file name, transcript, whatever. I start transcript, the only path, the only variable, parameter is path, and you can split path or the profile variable. So it goes in my place where I put my Windows PowerShell stuff, and then transcript with a date that gets replaced in the double quotes, which we'll talk about later. And now my transcript is started, and I don't have to worry about missing a transcript. Now, the thing about start transcript, it's important enough that if you start transcript with a path and that path does not exist, PowerShell will absolutely create it for you down to the file. I mean, you can go 10 levels deep on path and a file, and it will create it all for you because it's that important. So just be aware that's going to happen if you mistype it or you put a different path here and it's wrong. It will be created for you. So you'll have to go looking for wherever that path goes. On the window, it does tell you where the transcript gets started. So just be aware that that's a thing. So I'll show you what happens here. We'll just go into my demos, see demo, and there's my profile. I'm going to .source my profile, .ps1, just to show you what it looks like. So see, start transcript started. Here's my output file, so it tells me exactly where it is. And then I have date, time, and I have how long did it take in seconds to execute the previous command. And then there's my folder. So that way I have all the way over to the left, I have my command. This 16 is the number of history that this command is in. And again, this goes in the transcript. So if I will open up my transcript, I can actually see what my history ID is, and I'll show you why. If I do get history, see how 15 is there and I don't see 16? But if I do it again, 16's there. So it has from 1 to the previous number. So I'm missing 17 because that was what I used to type in here. But I get all my commands that I can recall or whatever. But there's another cool thing. So I'm not going to belabor all the other stuff I did, except for saying that if I don't like to type exit, because you really should type exit in a PowerShell window or exit the window, and you should really, if you're going to use transcripts, you must get in the habit of stopping it, because in the later versions of PowerShell, they are buffered a lot. So if you don't hit stop, if you don't type stop transcript or execute stop transcript, then the transcript could get lost in memory. Some of it could be. Typically, it's pretty fast at writing the header, but sometimes the buffer doesn't flush unless you type stop transcript. So that's a problem. I register the event of exiting. So if I type exit without typing stop transcript, it will do stop transcript for me. So that's kind of handy. What you cannot capture is this guy. You cannot capture this X. If If you click that, no dice. It's not going to stop your transcript. You'll get whatever's in the transcript, and it may be corrupt. So just be careful. But here's my thing that I do that's special. I actually pull all of my history. So I save history right here. I get history and pipe it to a where clause of completed. Sometimes that's not good because that'll mess up my numbers. But I wanted to illustrate that you can do that. I usually leave this out so that I get all my history, even the ones that failed, so that my transcript matches this. So even though 15 might have failed, it still actually is 15 in my window. So if I go into my transcript, I see 15 and it failed, 15 still here. So if I see 16 that did succeed, I can see 16 and I know that 16, I can just go get history 16, I'm done. So I export that out to a file, basically what I do. When I exit, I type in, I don't type in exit me because I'm going to tell you a little secret. But this is a function called exit me. It stops the transcript, gets the history, and then exits my window. So that's kind of cool. I save my history off. Another little function that gets me my OS assemblies because I use SMO. This little guy is the trick. And when we do in person, I always ask, what do you think this is? Anybody know what char4 is? And there's kudos to people who do. Char4 is a control D character. So if you say you want to exit, you could type EXIT, enter. That's 5 keystrokes. If you're going to cheat and want just a quick one-handed way, you hit Control D and hit enter. So that's 3 keystrokes. If you don't count Control D as 1, and it executes exit me. So now it's going to exit me right here, boop, and it's going to go to top transcript, get history, and exit. So now I get a good quick way to Control D out, I'm out, and you can't do it naming it, so you have to do invoke expression so it can evaluate this character. So Control D works. So that's what I do. And the prompt is all here. I'm going to leave this to you, but I can actually customize my prompt with a function called prompt, and it will actually create my little fun prompt here. So it's kind of a cool little deal. But profiles are pretty cool. There is a question that says, where does the profile live or have to reside? And does it load when I run PowerShell or the PowerShell ISE? And the answer is the profile will always live where this guy is. $profile is the variable, and this variable is in the documents folder of your current user. There's a Windows PowerShell folder, and there's a file called Microsoft.PowerShell_profile.ps1. The reason why this is important is because you mentioned ISE. If I execute the ISE, which I usually, well, that's not what I meant. I usually don't use the ISE because I prefer to use Azure Data Studio, which is what we're going to use today, just because it has add-ins and all this stuff. PowerShell ISE, if I were to execute $profile, you'll notice one different thing. It adds ISE. So now not only do I have my profile my PowerShell _profile, I have my PowerShell ISE _profile. And to make matters worse, inside the Azure Data Studio, I'm going to start my transcript first because I want to make sure I get this. So let's start transcript here. Oh, come on. F8 has to work. There we go. So my transcript started. If I say profile here, you'll notice that it has VS Code in it. So it's not Microsoft.PowerShell, it's Microsoft.VS Code. Now I have 3 of them to manage. So sometimes in certain environments, when you're going in and out of these tools, you may want to have a profile like this where you say, oh, not new query. Sorry about that, guys. Let's go out of here, do new file. We select the language of PowerShell. And you might .source a file with a path. You might have C profiles and .source that in every one of these different files. So Microsoft.VS Code, your Microsoft PowerShell ISE and your Microsoft.PowerShell_profile.ps1 and dot source this one file and just manage this one file. So there's ways to do it so that you govern where it is, but it does only look in the $ profile place, wherever that is. And if you don't have one, it doesn't load one. So if you want one, make sure you put it in the right place and it's named correctly, unless you're going to dot source it, which in this case, you could just name it whatever you want and put this in this file. So the easiest way to do that is just notepad $, profile. And if it doesn't exist, it will say you want to create it. If it does exist, guess what? You have it. It's there. So you're good. All right. Enough about profiles. So we're good. All right. Now we're going to go into the demo for dbaTools. So hopefully this was helpful to get you an idea. We're going to go into dbaTools because this is what we're talking about. The important piece is the idea that dbaTools is now an ecosystem. So before, it was kind of willy-nilly. When it opened up to open source, we all contributed. I contributed a few, and there was many things that got contributed. The only thing that was constant back then was verb-dba. So get-dba login, add-dba login. But that was really the only thing that was the most common or the rule. As it went forward, the naming conventions were a little, helter-skelter, but they quickly, before they went 1.0, they were always 0.9 something and grew and grew and grew and got more and more commands, which is great. But they added a couple to make sure that you understood where you were dealing with context. So verb-dba is typically a global command meant to be dealing with the server, not really specific to a database or an AG, but general. So verb-dba command. So get-dba login. Logins are at the server level. Everything's happy. Whenever you deal with a database, get-dba db file, because it's a file in a database. The server doesn't have files. Only databases do. So you'll see this db as an extra piece of property in the context realm. Couple extra characters, great. But you'll always see DBA, and then you might see DB in a command, and you might see AG in a command. So just be aware that's the syntax sugar that is out there, so that when you see a command, you know exactly, at least some context, what it's going to operate against. And we'll see some of those commands as we go down below. But it's important to understand the ecosystem of where you live, because that's tripped people up. The parameters, these are common parameters, and you should always remember that these are there. They didn't mix them. They didn't mess with you and kind of make one this one and the other one this one. They standardized across all of the modules. So SQL Instance is where you access your instance, and it is most always an array. So you can actually have multiple instances you're going to operate against. And you can pass the array into the SQL instance, and dbaTools will do the option against all servers. So if I said get-dba login, and I said -SQL instance, and I passed in 2 servers, it would go to each server and get the logins. So that's like, what? Like, that's kind of cool. Then you can dedupe them. You can find out if they existed on one but not the other, using commands like sort and group inside PowerShell. So SQL Instance is pretty awesome. Where you use this probably the most, say you wanted to execute something against multiple instances. Say you were setting an SP configure value, or you were setting or just running a T-SQL command against all of them to execute something. You could do invoke-dba query with a SQL instance of 10 instances, and it will actually go and execute whatever you wanted to invoke DBA query to. It would execute it against every instance, which is super versatile for you. It can even bring back result sets from 10 servers or 20 servers. Just be aware of memory footprint, but that's a cool thing you can do. Database is the same. There's a database parameter on most commands that you're executing against, and they can most always be an array. Now you'll want to look, I'll show you how, but you'll want to look and see if it accepts an array. But most often you're going to have an anomaly where it doesn't accept an array, which is pretty dang cool. So the last thing you need to know about dbaTools in the ecosystem or the plumbing of this module is that they'll always try to give you a friendly error message. Now, that's not always true in other modules. They just kind of blah and give you what the raw exception is. But in dbaTools, they've allowed this enable exception parameter that if you don't say enable exception, it's a switch. So you just on or off, just use it or don't. The enable exception will turn off their friendly neighborhood Spider-Man messages and will give you the raw exception as it came back from the SMO object, from the server, whatever it is that you're doing inside dbaTools, you'll just get the raw blah and you'll have to deal with it. Some people like that, some people don't. But if you don't specify it, you'll get a friendly message, which is great. Now, the last thing about this commonalities is, before we get into views and how you use the functions, is that you have to remember that this module was written by multiple people. So it wasn't just one person just slamming the keyboard to get this stuff out. So some authors of these commands chose to give you data or information about things. So when you say get-dba db file, you might expect that you get a file object back. dbaTools loads SMO for you by default. That's fact. So you get the nice, robust objects to deal with. But in get dba db file, this is actually data coming back, not actually a file. And I'll show you that just to show you how. But this is how we tell. We get type or get member. We pipe it to get member, and you'll see, and we'll see it. But this is what you need to understand. Some commands will return you an object. Get-dba database. It will actually be an SMO database object coming back. Connect-dba instance will actually be a server object from SMO. A get dba db file will be data. It'll be result set. It'll be an object, but it will just be data. You can't actually do $file equals get-dba db file and then do $file.drop. You can't do that because it isn't an SMO object. But server and database are. So just be aware. And the last thing before we get into how to use this is that there's a default view. And this will become very apparent when you do something like, we'll show you. When we get a DBA database, we'll show you how to tell. But the default view just basically shows you what the author believed you should see for you when they execute this command. It may not be everything you want to see, but it is everything you need to see from the author's perspective. But there is more to the object. So it hides a lot, and it's called the default view. And you'll get those default views in every object. Some default views are just spewing all the data. And some default views are very pretty. You'll see them in just a second. We're going to connect to an instance I have on this box. And you'll see with connect-dba instance, again, SQL instance is one or more. I'll show you the more. But in this case, we're going to do one. And you'll notice that when I execute this, it will go out and connect to an instance called SQL 01. And you'll see it comes back, computer name SQL 01. The name of my instance is, the name of my server is SQL 01. It's a SQL server. It's got the version. It's got Windows as the platform, is Azure, no, is clustered, no, and connected as me, okay? That's great, that's fantastic. The idea is that this is not all you could see in a server. I mean, I don't think that's really real. And I'll show you, we'll connect to it again, and we'll show you what get member shows you. There are a lot of properties and methods on this boy, but notice the type is, look at that, smo.server. It's a real live object that you can actually enumerate cluster subnets, you can enumerate collations, member, all sorts. So you can do all sorts of things with the thing, except you didn't see that when you connected. You only saw a little piece of it. I can use get type as well. So that was the two pieces, get type or get member. We saw get member showing us everything we could possibly do with this thing. And these are extra. I'll show you that. I'll talk about these in a second, because that's another thing of dbaTools is that it does help you out a little bit by giving you a quick tool that's down and dirty if you just want to execute something. But if I get it into a variable like this, I can still get type on this guy. So let's execute these two lines. And you'll see that I get it. And then look at that. Here's my type. Get type says I am a SMO SQL object and I am of type server. So now I know I have a real server. Now let's look at DBA file. So here's DB file. We're going to go ahead and do demo 1, I think, is the name of the database. And we're going to execute this guy. And I knew it wasn't demo 01. I knew it was demo 1. So we'll do that again. So it comes, oh, look at that. Wait a second. I just got my DB file and it says it's an array of objects. Like, that's not an SMO guy. Let's look at what's in there. Oh, look at that. There's no default view except spewing data, right? So it's just data, but it starts with computer name, instance name, SQL instance. Then you're talking about the file ID 1, which is the data MDF file. Then you have rows, and then you have path and size. So you have lots of information, but it's just information. If I do a get member on that guy, you'll see that there's no properties, and there's only these methods which are default on object. So it's not like an SMO server, but they're all note properties. So just know that you can get back data or an object, whichever one the author chose to give you. So be aware, that's kind of cool. Now, I did this demo on an AG, and I don't happen to have an AG on this particular machine. So we're going to talk through these things. Here's my instances in an array. Anytime you comma separate something on the command line, it goes into an array. Or I can use this syntax. The @ and open parenthesis also indicate an array with comma separated in the parentheses, if you care to do so. This syntax here is a hash table, which is what we're going to demonstrate here in a minute, called splatting. And this is going to be your favorite technique with dbaTools because it's so friendly to splatting. It's very, very important to understand splatting in dbaTools world. We're going to let this be up to you to test because I don't have these instances on here. Now I do have, if I wanted to change these because we are in a transcript, we are going to do it anyway. So there's my, there's my SQL 1 and SQL 2 and my demo 1. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, let's go out here and check. I believe I have demo 1 on both instances. I do. So we are safe in, and even if we didn't, it would come back with not much. So here's my SQL instance parameter. I put it in a hash table, so it's name and value pairs. So my name is SQL 01 and SQL 02 in an array. My database is demo 1. It's a name value in a hash table, which is kind of cute, but it's nice. I did this to illustrate another thing, which I'll show you in just a second. but I'll set it up here. So we're going to do Splat instance here, and we're going to connect -DBA instance with Splat instance. Notice I didn't say -SQL Instance. I just did Splat. So it will take the names of the parameters and match them with any name and value pair. We know there's a SQL Instance parameter. We know there's a database parameter. So I'm just going to splat it with, instead of a $, I'm going to splat it with an @ sign, because the @ kind of looks like a flat something. So it's splatted. And it's just going to map my names to my values. So if I execute this, notice it will connect to both servers. That's pretty slick. I could have put this in a variable as well. And now I have both servers, server 1 and server 2, all in a variable. So I can just carry those with me, which is really absolutely cool. Now, if I ran this, watch what happens here. So I say Splat instance, and I put in SQL 01 and 02. My Ben name is equal to Bob. Now, do you think that there may be or may not be a variable or a parameter called Ben inside DBA instance? Well, we'll see. Just a second. We'll go on this line and we'll execute this, and it'll come back and say, oh, you guys, Ben's not that cool. He doesn't have a variable or a parameter in this instance. He doesn't have a parameter named Ben. And so you cannot splat a non-mapped parameter in a hash table. You have to remove that and don't do Ben. Now, the important part is that you actually can fake yourselves into believing that it will work, because I could do this without commandlet binding and it would actually work. And I won't illustrate this. I'll leave this to you. But the two ways to do this are with and without commandlet binding. And without it, you can actually pass in a splat that doesn't exist, and it won't balk at you. Once you put commandlet binding, which is in every one of the dbaTools commands, commandlet binding will bind itself, and the rule is you cannot put Ben as a parameter and expect it to map it. So it'll fail, just like we saw in here where it matches parameter Ben. Nope, don't match. So anyway, that's an exercise for you. I leave in there. I just want to explain it. All right, so let's talk about commands. So first, these are pretty new to me. I haven't used these in my world, but they actually work really well. And because I don't have a cluster here, I wanted to illustrate these, but they have computer names because clusters deal with nodes, not with instances. Now there is a role that is a instance, but you would connect DBA instance to get to that role as a SQL Server. These are all everything to do with clustering. So get available disk and get the cluster name. And notice it's prefaced. I didn't illustrate this to you before, but just like AG is a prefix, WSFC stands for Windows Server Failover Cluster. So there is a prefix of DBA WSFC, and it only deals with clustering. But you could get your cluster, you could get your networks, you could get your nodes. It's really, really slick how that works, but there's clustering stuff in there now. AG creation, this was one that was really, really cool to me. It used to be back in the day when dbaTools had not really a lot of AG stuff. But here we see our prefix, DBA AG listener, DBA AG replica. It used to be that SQL Server module was the only one that had creations of AGs and replicas and all this stuff. And that is not the case anymore. So several AG stuff that you can get, enables, disables, removes, all that stuff. So these are the commands I want to illustrate, and I won't be able to do this because I don't have an AG right here. But hopefully I'll be able to do a little video soon about how to do this. But new DBA availability group. Now notice it didn't say AG because I'm not dealing with the availability group yet. I'm actually creating one. So it's DBA without AG. I specify my primary. My cluster type is WSFC. My backup preference is there. My secondary is the preference, and then I confirm false. and it will create me a new availability group in SQL called dbaTools AG. Then I can get it. Now, what if I want to, I did this on purpose. I had AG01, I wanted to add AG02. This is one of the commands that does not allow you to add a DBA AG replica without pipelining. There is no way. If you do get help on this command, you cannot execute that command and have it work. It needs the input of an availability group, which is retrieved by get-dba availability group. I pass in my instance. Now I could have said, comma, AG02. I could have, and it would have done it with the failover modes and everything. But being that I only created a one node thing, I wanted to add my replica. So I basically get my availability group, name it, and then say add replica. SQL instance is this guy. If failover mode is manual and seeding mode is manual, and it will actually add that replica, set these settings, and I'm good to go. Then I have the ability to add a DBA AG database, SQL instance of which I'm going to add it to. Obviously, it would need to be the primary. Availability group is here. Database is this database. And secondary is where I'm going to put secondary manual seeding. My shared path here. And guess what? It will actually back up my database and put it over on the other side with this secondary. And it will make me have a real availability group with the database in there instead of just adding it to the primary and then having you have to do that for yourself. So that's really slick. And just be aware that it is one command. I have this backtick here that is escaping my return. So it is one line, but for purposes of the screen being this big, just want to make sure you saw that there was a little there wasn't dust. It was actually a backtick up there by the tilde. I know, great names, a backtick and tildes. It's awesome. But then I can get my availability group here. I can add a listener by adding this with the name and then the listener and the port and say DHCP. I can invoke the failover and have it fail it over. I can invoke it back. I can remove the availability group, which I did live, and it just ripped it out. And then I can get my DBA endpoint and remove DBA endpoint. So I can rip out my database mirroring endpoints as well. So I can basically clean up everything about once I remove the availability group, it drops the availability group out, leaves the databases behind, but then I can grab my endpoints and go, yep, I don't want it anymore. I could even, if I wanted to, disable this guy right here, disable DBA AG HADR. So that will unset the setting for the cluster in your configuration parameters. Okay, so that was cool. And I think this was a cool, worthy thing to talk about. But this is the one thing that is going to get bigger and better, that it's really slick. But dbaTools config, hopefully you've got to play with this. If you haven't, it is a super cool, fun thing to do. But dbaTools config has a, I'm just going to run it flat out just so you can see it. And so it's in the transcript. Where'd it go? Come on, you can do it. Let's see it again. Oh, there we go. Here we go. So now we go take a look at this and you'll see that there are a lot of configs and their types. So we'll go to the top of the config. This will be in your transcripts. That's kind of cool. And you can run it yourself if you want. But assets, you have a SQL build reference, and here's the value. And this is the description. The URL or dbaTools fetches the up-to-date build reference index. And then you have availability groups. So you can actually set the cluster type here. The default is WSFC. So I didn't have to specify the cluster type because I didn't. It would have, now let me preface this. This type of config, just because you put it in here, because you can add dbaTools config yourself, but just because you put it in here doesn't mean that dbaTools is going to know about that config. These are here because dbaTools put them here. So I wouldn't have had to put WSFC as the cluster type if I didn't want to, if I wanted WSFC, because this config value is used by that commandlet. So it would reach in here, see what the cluster type was. And if it didn't have a parameter in here, it's because somebody deleted, I can remove this guy. And then it would say, well, then you have to tell us which WSFC or whatever, or none. You have to tell us. But that's the beauty of this guy, is that if you wanted to write your own dbaTools command and contribute, you can actually take advantage of whatever's in here for availability groups. You might have seeding, the seeding mode. You might say manual. It's always manual. I don't want ever to be auto. And when I create it, I'm going to do that. Or you say you want that to be part of the command. You could actually file an issue on the dbaTools GitHub and say, I'd like you to add this as a default config, and I want you to reach in and you do a new availability group, reach in, grab this value, move on. So that it's just a really good ecosystem to mess with. So it's kind of cool, but it has lots computer management. So bad connection timeout, all sorts of things that you can take advantage of, or that are taken advantage of that you can change, such as, I knew I'd lose it. There was one about the PS1 thing, and I think I might have left it in here, right here. The SQL PS check. Notice when I ran, oh, I didn't do that here. If I would have imported, let's just open up a new one. If I import module SQL Server, and then I import module dbaTools, I loaded SQL Server before dbaTools, and dbaTools doesn't quite like you when you do that. I'm sure it likes you. It doesn't like it when this happens. So it says, hey, if you want to bypass and not see this message at all, then set dbaTools config, name equals this, value equals false, and pass through and register dbaTools config. So from now on, if I ran that command, it would never check for the SQL PS check anymore. It wouldn't do that as long as this machine, if you want to unregister it, you can unregister it. But that's what it's for the dbaTools config, is to help you set things that you may not want to see or that you want to take advantage of, such as colors or maximum info and stuff like that. So info color, you can change that. So there's some really cool things. If you want to remove all the registered config, you just unregister and it will take it out of the registry so that it won't look anymore. It will now look default stuff. Okay. And this is what we just did, is tested SQL Server and dbaTools. All right. So the other thing that is super cool about dbaTools, and I know I don't have a whole lot of time left, but I want you to see these things because this plagues me every time I get a new server, or every time I go to a client and they just don't know what they don't know who is active is at all, or even first responder kit or anything. There are installs for these guys that you can do. Install DBA Darling Data, first responder kit from Brent Ozar. This is Eric Darling here as a Darling Data. The maintenance solution, that's Ola Hallengren's solution for maintenance for backups and index optimize and DBCCs and all that stuff. Multi-tool, DBA SQL Watch, who is active, that's Adam Mechanic stuff. So you can just install DBA who is active, and I go into a client, and this is the first thing I do with an array of server names and say database master, and it puts who is active. I always say DBA who is active. It's terrible. It always puts who is active on for all of the servers I want to manage. It's fantastic. But that way I have the tools. And on the internet bound servers where you have internet, this guy actually downloads the newest version out there and puts it on the server. So it's just beautiful. If I ran this guy, you'd see that it would come back and say, it would download it, obviously. And then it would go in and say, oh, it updated it because it was already there. If I saw added, then it would be, or installed, it would mean that it wasn't there. But this is the version that was installed. I could have done it on several servers and it would have done it all at once. The export DBA diagnostic query. This is Glenn Berry stuff. This has a use selection helper. So if you're familiar with Glenn Berry's DMVs, I could execute this guy and have it invoke DBA diagnostic query, and it would let me choose. I'm sorry, this is probably too small, but it would let me choose. So I'm going to choose host information. I could choose multiple, and it will execute it and give me the data. So there it is. SQL 1, blah, blah, blah. And I got my host info. I didn't even have to know or have the DBA DMVs out there. I just invoke them and it just executes them. It's beautiful. The last big thing is migration. This module became it began its life as a migration utility for Chrissy Lemaire, who is the author of this amazing little startup that we love in the DBA tools. But copy anything. Start DBA Migration is a one-stop shop where you can specify the source, the destination, use backup and restore. Shared path is here, and it will just rip it. It will do everything. Now, I've even done it where I've just done databases, and I just said, there's parameters in here to tell it what you want to exclude. So I could exclude databases. So say I migrated the databases all by myself, but I wanted everything else. I could just say -exclude, and you can look up this command on the dbaTools website, which I'll show you in just a second. And it would actually migrate everything, credentials, logins, jobs, everything for you. It's amazing. But the way you find that is if you're out here in dbaTools.io. I know it's not .com or .net, but .io. You go to the docs, and here you are right here, all of them here. So if I said start-dba migration, it would filter. I'd click here, and you'll see that it has a lot of parameters, but there's your exclude guy. You can exclude SA rename specifically, but you can exclude, and it's array of strings. This little thing means array, multiple strings. And when you go down to the exclude parameter here, it tells you what you can do. So here's your list: databases, logins, agent server, credentials, all of these things you can specify as an exclude, or the inverse, exclude the ones you've already done or willing to do yourself, and then it will do the rest. So just know that these are the ones it includes. If you don't specify exclude, these are the ones it does. So it's really actually pretty slick. And here's the values that you can do. Accepted values right here. So databases, logins, agent server, this is what they're called. So you would specify these in a comma separated list, and all of them that you specify would be excluded. So really cool docs page if you want to get deep into the docs. Once you click on a link, you actually will, it'll reset the filter. So you can redo your filter. So this is a one-stop shop. I use a lot of copy a DBA logins, and it will keep the SIDs and stuff like that. Copy the registered servers, copy the resource governor stuff, copy SP configure, super cool. These also have export commands, some of them. Export DBA SP configure, you can export all of your SP configures to a file, stuff like that. So super, super cool. I left these in so you can play, you can back up DBA database, you can get DBA DB backup history, and then restore it right off with reuse to another server. Get it from SQL 1, restore it on SQL 2, whatever. So super cool there. And then just lots of other commands that you get in here. But the biggest piece for you is to understand that there are so many commands you're going to have to play. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you as we end, hopefully right on time because it's right at the moment, is the thing we saw when we did server get member. Let's just go back up to our server here, our server and get member. There was that one little thing that we saw that was pretty cool. See this little invoke and query. On the server object, there's an invoke and query. On the database object, we're just going to get a database object now. So we're going to get this into s.databases 0, and we're just going to pipe it to get member. And we'll show you what it added. There's script properties of invoke and query. Now on a server, the invoke just is going to invoke your command. So if I did, I have my server, so I'm just going to say s.invoke, select name from sys.databases. And I'm going to invoke it. The query invoke. Okay, let me give you a difference. I inadvertently did invoke. I meant query. Invoke means you're not going to get return. Invoke just means you're going to execute it. Nothing's going to come back. It means that you want to update, insert, whatever. You're going to do something that you don't require execute to come back. Query, on the other hand, will let you query your data. And it does have a default of master. I believe that query actually can specify a database. So MSDB. And it will execute under the MSDB context, but sys.databases is whatever, and it works. But query will bring back result sets. Invoke is just basically an execute with no results to come back. And it happens on the database. The database, although you don't have to specify the database, because on the database, it's in the database. It executes it in that database. So that's super cool to have that function be able to invoke and execute the things like an update, delete statement, and then a query to get data back into your world, into a variable or whatever. So I have much more here for you to play. I did this on purpose so you could have many things to go and mess with, commands that are out here. Super cool stuff, but there's so much to do, and we had a lot of fun already. So we're going to end it here and hope that you have a great day. And if there's any questions, we do have a little time. On the last session, they said I could take some questions if you guys wanted more questions, but I'll leave it to Andy to kick me out of the room.
Great job. Thank you so much. So yeah, if there's any questions, just a typical one of, will these scripts and presentation be available? Well, everything for GroupBy is being recorded. And what is it? You said your scripts are going to be up on your GitHub, correct? Yep,
they're going to be up on my GitHub right here. GitHub presentations GroupBy. There will be a folder called dbaTools Deep Dive in here, and that's where they'll be uploaded in just a little bit, probably in the next hour. I'll package them all up and with the transcript, and I will put them up here so that you guys can get them in less than an hour. So you're all good.
Outstanding. Before you guys bounce up, please do me a favor. Give Ben a little bit of feedback in the chat, positive or negative. The easiest way I like to do this is ask people, just do like a quick +1 or a 0 or a -1, you know, if this session met your expectations, and if not, and, you know, if there's any constructive feedback, that's cool too. But, you know, just in lieu of, you know, applause or Rotten Tomatoes, you know, just a quick little +1
throw
would be appreciated.
It's all good. Yeah, if there's something I could do better to suck less, don't tell me I sucked. Just if there's something I can do to make it better, or that you'd like to see that you didn't see, that you think should have been there, please. I modify this presentation a lot because there's so much to do, and some people go, yeah, less on the availability group and more on the okay. Hey, that's great feedback, and I'm totally willing to take it and modify the presentations to be organic, because different people like different things. And the more I get that feedback, the more I can navigate to make the session better. And maybe it's like, don't ever show slides or whatever. That's fine with me too, because I hate slides. I'll show the GroupBy logo and we're out. That's totally good. But yeah, just please make sure. And if you don't want to put it in the chat, please feel free to email me. It's really about the community in GroupBy. It's all about that. So we want to be better and get better. So
absolutely. So, all right, one last call for any final questions or any more +1s or +whatevers in the chat. I'm kind of keeping an eye out there. We'll give people another, say, 20 seconds or so.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Doesn't look like anything is coming on in. So with that, I guess we'll just wrap things up. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for the very first day of GroupBy. Don't forget, there's yet another day tomorrow. Of course, those are EMEA hours. So if you're based here in the US, you're going to have to get up pretty early for some of those sessions. But there will be some sessions that will overlap to the US time zones as well. So I hope to see you in some of those. Otherwise, hope everyone has a fantastic day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.